Our next presenter is Maddy Correia. Maddy Correia is a member of the class of 2019. She is the writer for The Spectrum, a student council member, a former student representative of Dartmouth School Committee Board, a member of the Environmental Club, and a viola player for the DHS String Orchestra. She hopes that her talk will spark a change in how our community views and treats those addicted to opioids, and gives insight to how other nations have handled their own opioid epidemics. Maddy has a personal connection to the subject matter, which she will discuss. Please welcome Maddy Correia as she presents Opioid Addiction, Rehabilitation over Incarceration.
Thank you. Today, I'm going to be talking about something that affected 2.1 million Americans in 2016 alone and kills 115 Americans every single day: the opioid crisis. The opioid crisis is the worst addiction crisis in American history and isn't improving at all. According to Blue Cross Blue Shield, the number of deaths caused by overdose on opioids from 2010 to 2016 has increased by 493%. This is a graph made by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and that top green line is just another way of putting that 493% into perspective. This is a crisis that affects everyone. According to Gus Andrew Teague II, Deputy Sheriff in Montgomery County, Ohio, it's not just the guy who's never worked a day in his life. It's airplane pilots, it's teachers. I'm sure there's law enforcement, firemen out there hooked on it. It's Joe Citizen that is dying. Sorry, okay. Unfortunately, on November 18th of 2017, my Uncle Ryan became one of those 115 Americans who dies every day from overdosing. He was 31 years old, a landscaper at Allendale Country Club, and a loving son, brother, friend, and uncle. The grief that strikes you from losing a loved one is much deeper when that person struggled with addiction. Knowing that a person who you love so much was being smothered by the strength of addiction in the last moments of their life is absolutely heartbreaking. One of the main ways my family has coped with losing Ryan has been trying to find answers of what went wrong so this cannot happen to another family again. The answers we found were just as shocking as the mortality rates. The sad truth is that while this problem is only growing, nothing effective is being done. In October of 2017, the White House declared the opioid crisis a public health emergency, but did not grant any additional funds to the crisis. According to experts in the field, the $6 billion that was granted by Congress as aid needs to be increased by at least 25 times to effectively end the crisis. Instead of putting the necessary amount of funds into aid and taking actual effective action, we are locking up our addicts and letting them suffer from severe withdrawal symptoms and an extremely damaging lack of positive emotional and social connection that is essential to their recovery. Luckily, my uncle was never incarcerated for drug use, but the sad truth is that he was lucky. 43% of prisoners lose contact with their families while serving time, and this contact, like I stated before, is essential to recovery. When addicts are aware of the support they have, they are much more likely to become psychologically independent from drug use. If my uncle lost contact with us, being his support group, he may have had much less time with us. The most staggering statistic about drug addicts being incarcerated that completely proves this is that according to the National Association of Drug Court Professionals, 95% of incarcerated drug addicts will relapse once released from prison. If this doesn't make you question America's system of incarceration as treatment, I don't know what will. America needs to stop treating drug addiction like a moral failure as opposed to what it really is, a disease. Luckily, the US isn't the first to struggle with a crisis like this. Portugal is an outstanding example of giving addicts a new pathway to recovery in a much cheaper and more effective way. In the early 1990s, 1% of Portugal's population was addicted to heroin. Portugal took the radical chance of completely decriminalizing all drug use. Portuguese citizens who were found guilty of using or possessing drugs were assigned to a panel which consisted of a psychologist, a social worker, and a legal advisor who created a treatment plan for their patient. Since these new laws, Portugal has been seeing outstanding improvements. Portugal currently has 3 fatal overdoses for every 1 million citizens. HIV infection caused by needle sharing has decreased by over 50%, and the number of people enrolled in methadone treatments went from before the policy was in place from 6,000 to 14,000. That's almost a 150% increase. Not only has this new model been proven to be extremely effective, but it's also very cost efficient. These therapies used are significantly cheaper than incarceration. As of 2008, the average cost of incarceration was $24,000, and the average cost of treatment was $4,000, and this is in the US. The money usually spent on law enforcement against addicts can now cover their treatment with ease. In my opinion, Portugal's groundbreakingly effective and cost-efficient approach to their opioid epidemic is exactly what America needs at this stage in this horrifying crisis. With casualties increasing and more Americans becoming consumed by the horrors of addiction, this country needs a profound change. While the government obviously needs to do most of the work, don't think you are helpless. Giving someone in your life who is just starting to use drugs or is completely submerged in addiction the extra support, attention, and care they need can make all the difference in their world and could ultimately save them from one last fatal use. Thank you.